It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at the luxury car dealership, a place that prided itself on serving only the wealthiest and most elite clientele. The showroom sparkled under bright lights, showcasing rows of gleaming cars that represented the pinnacle of automotive engineering. Leather seats, polished chrome, and sleek curves told stories of opulence and success. Behind the front desk, the manager, Robert Grant, stood with his usual air of authority. His tailored suit, sharp tie, and perfectly groomed appearance mirrored the brand's prestige he so fiercely guarded. As the doors to the showroom swung open, a man stepped in, his presence immediately noticeable, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he carried himself with quiet confidence. Marcus Hall was a tall, unassuming man in his early 40s. His dark jeans, casual blazer, and well-worn sneakers made him seem out of place in a dealership where even potential customers often came dressed to impress. Yet Marcus didn't falter. He walked in with purpose, his gaze sweeping across the showroom as though he were assessing it. Robert's sharp eyes narrowed as he spotted Marcus. Years in this business had taught him to size people up at a glance, and in his mind Marcus didn't fit the profile of a serious buyer. Dismissing him as just another window shopper wasting valuable time, Robert tightened his jaw and exchanged a knowing look with the receptionist. "I'll handle this," he muttered under his breath. Marcus approached the first car in the lineup, a sleek black luxury sedan with a price tag that would make most people gasp. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, appreciating the craftsmanship. But before he could even move to open the door, Robert was by his side, his smile tight and his tone dripping with condescension. "Good morning," Robert greeted, though his body language suggested otherwise. "Can I help you with something today?" Marcus turned to him, his expression calm and composed. "Just looking," he replied politely. Robert's smile faded ever so slightly. "These are premium vehicles," he said, his voice deliberately slow and overly explanatory, as if speaking to someone unfamiliar with luxury. "Our clients typically schedule appointments. Do you have one?" "No," Marcus replied simply, his eyes still scanning the car. "Well," Robert continued, barely masking his irritation, "we're very busy today. Perhaps I can suggest another dealership that might be more in line with your needs." Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing the underlying message but choosing not to react. "I think this dealership will work just fine," he said, moving on to the next car. Robert followed closely, his patience wearing thin. "Look, I don't mean to waste your time, but our vehicles aren't for everyone. We cater to a very specific clientele. If you're looking for financing options or something more affordable, there's a used car lot down the street." The words hung in the air like a slap. Marcus paused, his hand resting on the door handle of the luxury SUV. He turned to face Robert fully, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I appreciate your concern," he said evenly, "but I'd like to see this vehicle." Robert hesitated, taken aback by Marcus's composed response. Something about the man's confidence made him uneasy, but he wasn't about to back down. "Suit yourself," he said with a dismissive shrug, gesturing for Marcus to proceed. As Marcus stepped inside the SUV, a few of the salespeople in the showroom began to notice the interaction. They exchanged whispers and subtle glances, their curiosity piqued by the manager's unusually curt behavior. Some seemed amused, while others looked uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Robert leaned against the car, his arms crossed as he waited impatiently. "You know," he began again, his tone almost mocking, "this model starts at 6 figures. Maintenance alone could cost more than a regular car payment. Are you sure this is what we're looking for?" Marcus didn't reply immediately. Instead, he inspected the interior with meticulous care, running his hands over the leather seats and studying the dashboard. Finally, he turned to Robert and asked, "What's the towing capacity on this model?" Robert blinked, momentarily caught off guard. It was a legitimate question, one that only someone genuinely interested in the vehicle would ask. But instead of answering, he deflected. "That information is available on our website," he said curtly. "Like I said, this might not be the best fit for you." Marcus stepped out of the SUV, his expression thoughtful. "You seem very determined to decide what's best for me," he said, his tone measured but firm. Robert bristled. "I'm just being honest. Not everyone can afford." Before he could finish, the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor interrupted him. A woman in a sharp business suit approached, her presence commanding attention. It was Evelyn Carter, the regional director of the dealership chain. She rarely visited individual locations, so her arrival instantly shifted the atmosphere in the showroom. "Mr. Hall," Evelyn greeted warmly, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you could make it today. I hope Robert has been taking good care of you." Robert froze, his face turning pale as the realization began to sink in. Marcus shook Evelyn's hand, a small, knowing smile playing the corners of his lips. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said. "I was just getting a feel for the place." Evelyn turned to Robert, her expression polite but firm. "Mr. Hall is the new owner of this dealership," she explained. "I trust you've made him feel welcome." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's jaw dropped slightly as the weight of Evelyn's words hit him. He looked at Marcus, his mind racing to piece together what had just unfolded. The man he had so arrogantly dismissed, the man he had all but shoved out the door, was not only a potential buyer, but the very person who now owned the dealership. Marcus met Robert's stunned gaze, his calm composure never wavering. "Well," he said after a moment, "I think I've seen enough for now." And with that, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Robert standing in the middle of the showroom, grappling with the consequences of his assumptions. The rest of the staff watched in a mix of awe and disbelief, realizing that everything they thought they knew about the day had just been turned upside down. As Marcus left the dealership, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He had come here not just to inspect his new investment, but to test the culture he was inheriting. And Robert's reaction had given him plenty to think about. As Marcus walked away from the dealership, his mind was swirling with thoughts. He had expected some resistance, sure, but the level of dismissal he had faced from Robert was something else entirely. Still, Marcus wasn't one to get worked up easily. Life had taught him to stay calm under pressure and let actions speak louder than words. He stepped into the car waiting for him outside. A sleek black sedan that blended into the city's bustling streets. The driver greeted him with a nod, and they pulled away from the dealership. The ride gave Marcus a moment to reflect. He hadn't always been a man who owned businesses and made deals in high-rise offices. His journey here had been long, filled with obstacles that could have broken him, but instead shaped him into the person he was today. Born and raised in a small, close-knit community, Marcus had seen firsthand how hard work could transform a life. His parents had been humble people, instilling in him the values of perseverance and humility. In his early 20s, Marcus had worked in a factory, putting in long hours while studying business at night. It wasn't glamorous, but he knew it was necessary. He had big dreams, ones that stretched far beyond the boundaries of his hometown. Over time, his relentless drive paid off. First, there was the small car repair shop he bought with his savings. Then came the chain of garages he built from the ground up. And now, here he was, stepping into the world of luxury cars. A world where appearances mattered more than character, and first impressions could define everything. The dealership was a key piece of his latest venture. It wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating an environment where customers felt valued, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. That was why his experience with Robert stung more than it should have. It was a harsh reminder of how far the world still had to go in breaking down prejudices. Meanwhile, back at the dealership, Robert was reeling. His hands trembled slightly as he replayed the scene in his head, each detail more damning than the last. How could he have missed it? There had been no formal memo about a new owner, just a vague mention of changes coming from corporate. If only he had known. But deep down, Robert couldn't shake the uncomfortable truth. It wasn't just ignorance that had driven his behavior. It was arrogance, plain and simple. The staff were buzzing with whispers after Marcus left. No one dared say anything to Robert directly. The tension was palpable. Even Evelyn's typically composed demeanor seemed strained. She had seen her fair share of missteps in leadership, but this was different. It wasn't just about a mistake, it was about what that mistake represented. She decided to give Robert space for now, though she knew a conversation was inevitable. Across town, Marcus arrived at his office, a sleek and modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. His assistant, Claire, greeted him with her usual efficiency, handing him a folder filled with updates on his latest projects. But even she could sense something was off. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Marcus nodded, though his expression gave little away. "Just a reminder that we still got work to do," he said, setting the folder on his desk. He didn't elaborate, and Claire knew better than to press. Marcus was a man who valued solutions over complaints, and when he was ready to talk, he would. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and phone calls. The dealership incident lingered in the back of Marcus' mind. It wasn't just about Robert. It was about the culture that allowed someone like Robert to feel comfortable making snap judgments based on appearances. And if that was happening on his watch, it was his responsibility to address it. By evening, Marcus had a plan forming. He wasn't one for grand speeches or dramatic confrontations. Instead, he believed in action, in showing people a better way and letting them decide if they wanted to come along for the journey. Tomorrow, he would return to the dealership, not as a distant owner, but as a leader ready to set the tone for what he expected. Back at the dealership, Robert stayed late, pacing the showroom floor as the day's events played over and over in his mind. He considered calling Evelyn to explain himself, but he knew it would do little good. Words couldn't undo what had happened. His only hope was to prove he could do better, though even he wasn't sure if that was possible. As the showroom lights dimmed and the staff headed home, Robert sat alone at his desk, staring at the sales reports in front of him. For the first time in years, he felt a crack in his confidence, a gnawing doubt about whether he truly belonged in the role he had worked so hard to achieve. The following morning, Marcus arrived unannounced, dressed much like he had the day before. This time, however, the staff were ready. Also, they thought. Word had spread quickly, and everyone was on their best behavior, eager to make a good impression. Robert, in particular, was practically overcompensating, greeting every customer with an enthusiasm that felt almost unnatural. Marcus observed quietly, taking mental notes as he moved through the showroom. He saw genuine effort from some staff, while others seemed more concerned with appearances than substance. And then there was Robert, whose forced cheerfulness couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. Finally, Marcus approached him. "Robert," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Can we talk?" Robert nodded, his throat dry. He followed Marcus to a small meeting room, where the two men sat across from each other. For a moment, the silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words. "I want to start by saying I'm not here to humiliate you," Marcus began, his tone measured. "But we need to address what happened yesterday." Robert nodded again, his eyes fixed on the table. "I was out of line," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I judged you without knowing who you were. That's on me." "It's not just about me," Marcus replied. "It's about how you treat anyone who walks through those doors. This dealership represents more than just cars. It's about building trust and relationships. And if we can't do that, we're failing, no matter how many sales we make." Robert looked up, his expression a mix of shame and determination. "I understand," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. "Because this isn't just about one apology. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are or what they look like. That starts with leadership." As they left the meeting room, Marcus couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but with the right guidance, it was possible. For now, though, the real work was just beginning. After the meeting, Marcus stayed at the dealership for the rest of the day, blending into the background while observing the team at work. He didn't interfere or offer suggestions just yet. He wanted to understand the inner workings, to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Marcus believed that the core of any organization wasn't its policies or its profits. It was the people who showed up every day to make it run. As he walked through the service bay, he noticed a young mechanic named Javier working on a high-end sports car. Javier was quick and precise, his focus unwavering despite the noise and bustle around him. Marcus lingered nearby, watching as Javier handled each tool with care, his movements efficient but never rushed. It was clear Javier took pride in his work, even if no one was watching. "Nice job," Marcus said casually when Javier finally straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Javier looked up startled. He hadn't seen Marcus standing there. "Oh, thanks," he said, his tone hesitant. "Can I help you with something?" "Just observing," Marcus replied with a small smile. "How long have you been here?" "About a year," Javier said. "It's a good job, pays the bills." "And do you like it?" Marcus asked. Javier hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "It's all right," he said cautiously. "I mean, I like working on cars. It's just, sometimes it feels like we're not really part of the team, you know? Like the salespeople and managers, they're up there." It gestured toward the showroom. "And we're down here." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's an important observation," he said. "Thanks for sharing." Javier gave a small nod, still unsure who Marcus was or why he cared. But something about the man's demeanor made him feel heard, even if he couldn't quite put it into words. Back in the showroom, tensions were still simmering. Robert was trying hard to project a sense of control, but his usual confidence had taken a hit. Some of the sales staff had noticed the change and were beginning to question his leadership. A few even whispered among themselves, wondering if Marcus's presence meant bigger changes were on the horizon. The air was thick with speculation, and every glance between co-workers seemed to carry a layer of hidden meaning. Meanwhile, Evelyn was observing from the sidelines, carefully weighing her next move. She knew Marcus had a plan. He always did, but she also understood that change, especially in a place as rigid as this dealership, would take time. Evelyn had seen plenty of managers come and go over the years, each one bringing their own style and vision. But Marcus was different. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, someone who understood that success wasn't just about numbers, but about people. As the day went on, Marcus decided it was time to speak to a few customers. He approached an older couple browsing the SUVs, their faces lighting up as he greeted them warmly. Unlike Robert, Marcus didn't talk down to them or make assumptions about what they could afford. Instead, he asked questions, listened to their needs, and offered thoughtful suggestions. Within minutes, the couple seemed at ease, chatting with Marcus as if he were an old friend. Robert watched from a distance, a knot forming in his stomach. He had always prided himself on his ability to close deals, but seeing Marcus interact with customers so effortlessly made him realize how much he had been relying on his authority rather than genuine connection. It was a humbling moment, one that left him feeling both inspired and uneasy. Later that afternoon, Marcus called an all-staff meeting. The employees gathered in the showroom, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. This wasn't something that happened often, and no one knew what to expect. "Thank you all for taking the time to meet," Marcus began, his voice steady and inviting. "I wanted to take a moment to talk about where we are and where we're headed. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the hard work you all put in every day. This dealership wouldn't function without each of you, from the mechanics to the sales team to the support staff. Your efforts matter, and they don't go unnoticed." A few people exchanged surprised glances, clearly not used to hearing this kind of acknowledgement. Marcus let the words settle before continuing. That said, he went on, "We can do better, not just in terms of sales, but in how we treat each other and our customers. This place should be more than just a business. It should be a community, a place where people feel valued and respected." His gaze swept the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame," he said. "But I do expect everyone here to reflect on how we can improve. That includes me. Leadership starts at the top, and I take that responsibility seriously." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of Marcus's words. He knew they were directed at everyone, but it was hard not to take them personally. As the meeting continued, Marcus outlined a few immediate changes he wanted to implement. These included more team-building activities, better communication between departments, and a renewed focus on customer experience. He encouraged everyone to share their ideas, promising that no suggestion was too small or insignificant. By the time the meeting ended, the mood in the room had shifted. There was still uncertainty, but there was also a sense of possibility, a spark of hope that things could be different. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's presence became a constant at the dealership. He spent time with each department, learning their processes and listening to their concerns. He made it a point to be approachable, greeting everyone by name and making it clear that no one was beneath his notice. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift. But not everyone was on board. A few employees resisted the changes, clinging to the old ways of doing things. One senior salesperson in particular made no secret of his skepticism, muttering under his breath about how the new guy was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Marcus took it in stride, knowing that change often brought resistance. Meanwhile, Robert found himself grappling with his own insecurities. He had always seen himself as a leader, someone who set the tone for the team. But now he wasn't so sure. He began to question whether he was the right person for the job, whether he had what it took to adapt to Marcus's vision. One evening, after the dealership had closed, Robert stayed late again, going over the sales reports in a quiet office. The numbers were decent, but he knew they weren't enough. For the first time in his career, he realized that success wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about building something sustainable, something meaningful. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had the tools to make it happen. As Marcus left the dealership that night, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the work ahead. Change was never easy, and the road would be long and challenging. But he was determined to see it through, not just for himself, but for everyone who walked through those doors. The dealership was humming with activity as the team adjusted to the changes Marcus had introduced. Though there were some signs of progress, a more collaborative atmosphere, a noticeable improvement in customer interactions. Underneath it all, the tension was still there, bubbling just below the surface. Not everyone was fully convinced, and Marcus could sense the unease among certain staff members, particularly Robert. Robert had been trying to adapt, putting on a good face for the rest of the team. But Marcus knew the cracks were there. His body language, the forced smiles, the occasional slip into his old habits, all of it painted a picture of someone who was struggling to reconcile his past behavior with the new expectations. Marcus hadn't pressed him too hard, giving him space to find his footing, but he also knew the moment of truth was coming. One rainy afternoon, the tension began to boil over. A high-profile client, someone Marcus had personally invited to the dealership, walked through the glass doors. The man was dressed casually, his demeanor relaxed but confident. He was the kind of customer who could single-handedly change the dealership's reputation, the type who didn't just buy a car, but created a ripple effect among other affluent buyers. Marcus had briefed Robert about this client earlier, reminding him to focus on building a relationship rather than pushing for a quick sale. But old habits die hard. As the client browsed the showroom, Robert's anxiety got the better of him. He approached the man with an overly rehearsed pitch, peppering him with technical specs and finance options before even asking what the customer was looking for. The client's smile faded slightly, his body language shifting from open to guarded. Marcus, who had been observing from a distance, saw the moment things started to unravel. "Robert," Marcus said, stepping forward with an easy smile, "why don't we take a step back and let Mr. Carter tell us what he's looking for?" Robert froze, his expression a mix of embarrassment and frustration. He nodded stiffly, stepping aside as Marcus took over. The client's demeanor softened as Marcus engaged him in genuine conversation, asking about his interests, his family, and what kind of experience he wanted in a car. By the end of their discussion, Mr. Carter was not only smiling but also ready to place a significant order. As the client left the dealership, Marcus turned back to Robert. "Walk with me," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. They stepped into Marcus's office. the rain tapping against the large windows like a metronome. Robert sat across from Marcus, his jaw tight, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his tie. "I need to know what's going on," Marcus said, leaning forward. "You've been trying, I see that, but something's holding you back. Talk to me." Robert hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I've been doing this job for a long time, Marcus. I've always believed in results, in hitting targets. But this," he gestured vaguely, as if trying to capture the essence of the changes Marcus was making. "It's different. And honestly, I don't know if I can keep up." Marcus studied him for a moment before responding. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "But this isn't about keeping up. It's about evolving. None of us are perfect, Robert. We all have room to grow, including me. But if you're not willing to at least try, then we have a bigger problem." Robert swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I want to try," he said finally. I don't know how to get out of my own way." "That's a start," Marcus said. "But it's going to take more than words. You need to make a choice. Are you going to cling to the old ways, or are you going to embrace the opportunity to be better?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Robert nodded slowly, though the doubt in his eyes hadn't completely disappeared. Meanwhile, the dealership itself was undergoing a quiet transformation. Javier, the young mechanic Marcus had spoken to earlier, had taken on a more active role in bridging the gap between the service team and the sales staff. His efforts hadn't gone unnoticed, and Marcus had started to mentor him, seeing potential in the young man's natural leadership abilities. Evelyn, too, had stepped up, acting as a steadying presence among the team and subtly guiding those who were resistant to change. But not everyone was on board. The senior salesperson who had been muttering complaints behind Marcus' back had begun to sow discord among some of the newer employees, whispering that Marcus's vision was unrealistic and that things would eventually go back to the way they were. The whispers started to spread, creating an undercurrent of doubt that threatened to undermine the progress Marcus had made. One evening, as the staff were locking up for the night, Marcus overheard two employees discussing the rumors. Their voices were hushed, but the words were clear enough. "It's not going to last. They never do. Just give it a few months, and everything will be back to normal." The comment stung more than Marcus cared to admit. He had poured his heart into this place, not just as an owner, but as someone who genuinely wanted to make a difference. Hearing that some of the staff didn't believe in his vision was a blow, but it also fueled his determination. He knew change was hard, and resistance was inevitable, but he wasn't about to give up. The next morning, Marcus arrived early, his mind racing with ideas on how to address the growing divide. He decided it was time to shake things up, to do something that would leave no room for doubt about his commitment to this team and this dealership. Whatever he planned next, it had to be bold enough to cut through the noise, to show everyone, Robert, the staff, the naysayers, that this wasn't just about business. It was about setting a new standard, one that could withstand the weight of skepticism and stand the test of time. The dealership buzzed with its usual morning energy, but a subtle tension lingered in the air. Marcus had spent the previous night drafting a plan to address the brewing doubts within the team. He knew words wouldn't be enough this time. He needed to demonstrate, unequivocally, that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. The key was finding a way to inspire unity, not just compliance. But as Marcus readied himself to implement his strategy, an unexpected twist threw everything into disarray. It started with an email. Evelyn found it first, her sharp eyes catching a subject line that didn't sit right. "Concerns about leadership transition." She clicked it cautiously, her stomach tightening as she read the contents. The message, written anonymously, outlined a litany of complaints about Marcus's leadership. It accused him of being out of touch with the realities of the dealership and implied that he was only interested in using the business as a stepping stone for his own ambitions. Evelyn forwarded the email to Marcus immediately, her hands trembling slightly. When Marcus read it, he felt a surge of frustration, but quickly tamped it down. The complaints weren't what bothered him most, it was the anonymity. The fact that someone on his team had chosen to air their grievances this way, rather than addressing them directly, spoke volumes about the lingering distrust within the dealership. He shared the email with Robert later that morning. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, sliding the printed copy across the desk. Robert read it silently, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he placed the paper down carefully and met Marcus's gaze. "I think you've rattled some cages," he said. "Not everyone likes change, especially when it threatens their comfort zones." "I need to find out who wrote this," Marcus said, his voice firm but measured. "Not to confront them, but to understand where this is coming from. If there's a legitimate concern, I want to address it." Robert hesitated, then spoke. "If you want my advice, don't make this about finding the person. Focus on the culture. Whoever wrote this isn't the problem, it's the fear behind it. That's what you need to fix." Marcus nodded, appreciating the insight. But before he could act on Robert's advice, another disruption rocked the dealership. Javier burst into the showroom, his face flushed with anger. "Marcus," he called out, his voice carrying across the room. "We've got a problem in the service bay." Marcus moved quickly, following Javier to the back of the dealership. The air was thick with tension as the mechanics gathered around a shiny new SUV. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But then Marcus noticed the damage, a deep scratch running along the side of the vehicle. "This car was fine when it came in," Javier said, his voice tight. "But now look at it, and no one's owning up to what happened." Marcus examined the damage, his mind racing. The SUV belonged to one of their most important clients, a loyal customer who had referred dozens of friends and family to the dealership over the years. This wasn't just a scratch on a car. It was a dent in the trust they had worked so hard to build. "I'll handle this," Marcus said calmly, though his mind was already turning over the implications. If the customer found out before they had a solution, the fallout could be catastrophic. But what troubled Marcus even more was the lack of accountability. Someone had made a mistake, and instead of owning up to it, they had chosen to stay silent. As the day wore on, the two crises, the anonymous email and the damaged car, began to intertwine. Marcus couldn't ignore the possibility that they were connected, both stemming from the same root issue: a lack of trust and transparency within the team. He called an emergency meeting, gathering everyone in the showroom after closing hours. When the team assembled, Marcus stood before them, his expression serious but not accusatory. "We have a problem," he began. "And it's not just about a scratched car or an anonymous email. It's about trust. This dealership can't function if we don't trust each other, if we don't feel safe enough to admit mistakes or share concerns openly." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not here to point fingers. But I need everyone to ask themselves one question. Are you contributing to the problem, or are you part of the solution?" The room was silent, the weight of Marcus's words hanging heavily in the air. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, her heart aching for Marcus as he faced the team with such vulnerability. Robert, too, was struck by the sincerity of Marcus's approach. For the first time, he saw not just a leader, but a man who genuinely cared about the people he worked with. But just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, an unexpected voice broke the silence. It was Javier. "I think I know what's going on," he said, stepping forward. "But you're not going to like it." All eyes turned to Javier, the anticipation almost unbearable. Marcus nodded for him to continue, his heart pounding. Whatever Javier was about to reveal, Marcus knew it would change everything. And as Javier began to speak, the room held its breath, the stakes higher than ever. The room was so quiet that even the faint hum of the air conditioning felt loud. Javier hesitated, glancing at Marcus before continuing. "The scratch on the SUV," he began, his voice steady but grim, "wasn't an accident. I caught one of the guys in the service bay trying to cover it up. When I confronted him, he got defensive, said it wasn't his fault, and stormed out before I could get more out of him." Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. Did he say anything else? Anything about why he'd do something like this? Javier nodded slowly. "He mentioned something about being fed up with how things are changing around here. said he felt like he was being set up to fail. The pieces began to fall into place in Marcus' mind. The scratch wasn't just carelessness. It was a deliberate act of sabotage, a desperate attempt to undermine the changes Marcus had been working so hard to implement. And suddenly, the anonymous email took on a new light. Robert, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. "This is bigger than just one mistake," he said. "It's clear that some people don't just feel uncomfortable. They feel threatened. And if we don't address that, it's only going to get worse." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He needed to act quickly, but he also needed to tread carefully. If he overreacted, he risked alienating the very team he was trying to unite. If he did nothing, the rift would only deepen. The next morning, Marcus called another meeting, but this time he took a different approach. Instead of standing at the front of the room and speaking to the team, he sat down with them in a circle. The mood was tense, the air heavy with unspoken worries, but Marcus spoke with quiet determination. "Before we get into anything else, I want to say this. I'm not here to blame anyone. What happened with the car and the email isn't just about individuals. It's about us as a team. Somewhere along the way, we stopped trusting each other. We stopped believing in what we could accomplish together. And that's on me as much as anyone else." His words hung in the air for a moment before he continued, "I need everyone here to understand something. This isn't just my dealership, it's ours. If you're feeling frustrated or left behind, I want to hear it. If you think there's a better way to do things, I want to know. But we have to do this together. We have to be honest with each other." The room was silent, the tension palpable. Then slowly, Evelyn raised her hand. "I think a lot of us are scared," she said. "Scared that the changes mean we're not good enough. Scared that we're going to lose what made this place feel like home." Her words struck a chord, and soon others began to speak up. The conversation was raw and messy, with emotions running high, but it was also the most honest the team had been with each other in years. Marcus listened carefully, his mind working to find common ground. But just as the meeting seemed to be winding down, Javier cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice hesitant. "I found out who wrote the email." All eyes turned to him as he looked over at Robert. The older man's face turned pale, and he let out a heavy sigh. "It was me," Robert admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The room erupted in murmurs, but Marcus held up a hand to silence them. "Why, Robert?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Robert shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was protecting the team," he said. "I've been here for years. I've seen people come in with big ideas, only to leave us worse off than before. I didn't want to see that happen again, but I see now that I went about it the wrong way." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for being honest," he said, "but trust works both ways. If you felt this strongly, you should have come to me. We can't fix problems we don't talk about." The tension in the room was thick, but there was also a sense of relief, a feeling that the worst was finally out in the open. And as the meeting ended, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt like they were all moving in the same direction. As the staff filed out of the room, Marcus stayed behind, watching the rain streak down the windows. He thought about everything that had happened, the conflicts, the betrayals, and the moments of unexpected unity. And as he stood there, he realized something. This wasn't just a job or a business. It was a chance to create something real, something lasting. But just as he allowed himself to feel a sense of closure, his phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line was simple but chilling. "Asterisk, you're not done yet, asterisk." Marcus opened it, his heart pounding. The message was brief, but unmistakably clear. Someone else in the dealership wasn't ready to let things go. And as Marcus stared at the screen, he knew the battle for trust and unity was far from over.